is a place that does not appear on any map drawn by careful hands. You will not find it by searching. You will not find it by asking. But if you are tired enough, the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and settles into the hollows of your shoulders, and if you are quiet enough inside yourself, the road will simply appear one evening, soft and pale as a ribbon of moonlight laid across dark grass. Sierra found it on a night in late autumn. She had been driving for a long time, not because she had somewhere to be, but because she did not. The car was warm, and the radio had gone quiet an hour ago, and she had simply kept going down roads that curved gently away from everything she recognized. The trees on either side were tall and bare, their branches reaching upward like slow, patient hands. The sky between them was the color of deep water, dark blue touched with the faintest silver, the kind of sky that feels like something is held just beneath its surface. She was not running from anything. That is important to understand. Sierra was simply a woman who had been awake for too many nights in a row, who had sat with too many small worries until they had grown familiar and heavy, who had forgotten what it felt like to exhale completely. She was 34 years old, and she was tired in a way that sleep had stopped fixing. The road narrowed. She noticed it gradually, the way you notice the temperature of a room changing when someone opens a window somewhere distant. The asphalt became something older, something more like pressed earth and pale stone, and the trees on either side grew closer together, their trunks wider and smoother, their bark the color of ash and quiet cream. Soft moss gathered at their roots in low, round cushions. The headlights caught it, and it glowed faintly, almost warmly, as though something in it remembered light fondly. Sierra slowed the car without deciding to. Ahead, the road curved around a gentle rise, and beyond the rise she saw it, a pale amber glow, low and steady, the kind of light that belongs to windows, not the sharp white light of modern buildings, not fluorescence or LED brightness, but something older and softer, the color of honey held up to a flame. It came from a structure set back among the trees, and even at this distance, even through the dark, there was something about it that made her chest loosen very slightly, the way it does when you walk into a room that smells like something you loved as a child and cannot name. She pulled the car to the edge of the road and sat for a moment. The engine ticked as it cooled. The trees were very still. Somewhere far off, too far to be distinct, there was the sound of water moving over stones, unhurried, continuous, the oldest and most patient sound in the world. Sierra stepped out. The air was cool and carried the smell of damp earth and pine needles, and something else, something faintly sweet, like wood smoke mixed with dried herbs, like the inside of a room where someone has been reading by candlelight for a very long time. She stood on the pale road and breathed it in and felt, very quietly, that she had not breathed properly in several weeks. The structure ahead was an inn. She could see that now as she walked slowly toward it. Not a hotel, not a lodge, but an inn the way old words mean things. 2 stories, stone-walled, with a roof that curved at the eaves like the brim of a hat pulled down against rain. The windows on the lower floor were wide and warmly lit, their panes old enough to hold small imperfections, the kind that made the light inside waver and breathe. Above the low wooden door, a lantern hung from a curved iron hook, not electric, but oil-fueled, its flame burning with the slow, deep steadiness of something that had never once gone out. There was a sign beneath the lantern. The letters were carved directly into the wood of the door frame, smooth with age, Morrow Hollow. Rest here. That was all. Sierra stood before the door for a long moment. The lantern above her moved very slightly in a breath of wind she barely felt, and its light shifted across her face and hands, warm, amber, without urgency. She became aware that some of the tension in her jaw had released. She could not say exactly when this had happened. She reached for the door handle. It was iron, worn smooth, and warm in a way that surprised her, not the warmth of a heated room, but something gentler, more intrinsic, as though the metal itself had always been this temperature, as though warmth was simply its nature. The door opened inward slowly, without sound. The smell reached her first, the wood smoke and herbs, and something like old books, like dried flowers kept in a drawer for years, like the inside of a wooden box filled with small, beautiful things. Then the warmth reached her, a low even warmth that did not press against her, but rather wrapped around her without insistence, the way a good blanket settles without being pulled. The room beyond the door was softly lit by several candles placed on a low stone mantel, their flames straight and still in the sheltered air. There was a hearth at the far wall, embers glowing red gold beneath a slow curl of pale smoke. There were chairs, deep and padded, the color of dark green and wan burgundy. There were bookshelves along the walls, filled with volumes whose spines bore no titles she could read from the doorway. Only colors, textures, the way old knowledge presents itself. And behind a low wooden counter near the back of the room, standing with a quietness that seemed to belong to the room the way stillness belongs to water, was a woman. She was older, not elderly, but the kind of age that carries the feeling of many unhurried years. Her hair was silver and loosely pinned, her face open and lined with the traces of expression rather than worry. She wore a long coat the color of deep green wool, and her hands rested on the counter the way hands rest when they are completely at ease. She looked up when Sierra entered, and her expression did not change in the way of surprise. It changed the way candlelight changes when a door is gently closed, settling, growing warmer, becoming more fully itself. "You found the road," she said. Her voice was low and even, like the sound of the water Sierra had heard in the distance, like something that had been flowing for a long time without effort. "I wasn't looking for it," Sierra said, and felt the honesty of this settle in her chest. The woman at the counter simply nodded, as though this made all the sense in the world. "They rarely are," she said. "Come in then. Close the door behind you." Sierra stepped inside. The door closed softly. The lantern outside went on burning. The woman's name was Marin. She did not offer this immediately. She offered it the way she seemed to offer everything, gently, when it was the right moment, without preamble or performance. Sierra had settled into one of the deep chairs near the hearth, her coat still on, her hands wrapped around a cup of something warm that Marin had placed before her without asking what she wanted. The cup was ceramic, rounded and heavy in the way of handmade things, glazed in a blue so dark it was nearly black, with a hairline crack along one side that had been repaired with something gold. The tea inside was pale amber and tasted of chamomile and something else, something floral and clean that Sierra could not identify, but that made her think of morning light on still water. "My name is Marin," the woman said from somewhere behind the counter, and Sierra looked up and said, "Sierra," and Marin nodded as though she had already known this and was simply glad to hear it confirmed. "How long has this place been here?" Sierra asked. It was the question anyone would ask, and yet even as she asked it, she understood it was probably not quite the right question. Morrow Hollow did not feel like a place that had been built at a particular moment in time. It felt like a place that had always been like a clearing in a forest or a pool at the bend of a river, something that arose where conditions were correct because the landscape required it. "Long enough," Marin said, and her tone carried warmth rather than evasion. "Long enough that the floorboards remember every pair of feet that has crossed them. Long enough that the walls have learned what quiet means." Sierra looked at the floorboards. They were wide planked and dark with age, worn smooth in the paths between the door and the hearth, between the hearth and the counter, between the counter and the narrow staircase at the back of the room. The worn paths were the color of deep honey. The unworn edges were darker, almost the color of old mahogany. She thought about all the feet that had made those paths over all the years, pressing the same lines into the wood the way water presses channels into stone. And something about this thought made her feel less alone than she had in a long time. The hearth crackled once, low and easy. A log shifted in the embers, sending up a brief curl of brighter flame before it settled back. "Do many people find the road?" Sierra asked. "Enough," Marin said. She came around the counter and moved to the hearth with the unhurried ease of someone who has learned that most things go better when you don't rush them. She added a single piece of wood to the fire, not a large piece, just enough to carry the warmth forward through the night, and then stepped back and regarded the flames with the same expression she had given Sierra when she first walked in. Open, settled, attentive. "Always people who are tired," she added, without looking away from the fire. "Not tired in their bodies necessarily. Tired in the part of themselves they used to carry everything. Sierra felt this description settle into her like the warmth from the fire, accurate and quiet and without judgment. "Yes," she said simply. Marin turned and looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, but contained everything a smile contains: warmth, recognition, ease. "You are welcome here," she said, "for as long as the hollow holds you." Sierra did not ask what that meant. She found that she did not need to. She sipped her tea and looked around the room more carefully now that the first strangeness of arriving had softened. The bookshelves, she noticed, were filled not only with books, but with other things: small glass bottles with stoppered lids, their contents unclear but various in color: pale green and dusty rose, and the amber of old brandy. A collection of small clay figures on one shelf, simple and smooth, each one depicting something from the natural world: a bird with wings half raised, a fox curled into itself, a small bear leaning its weight into a stone. On the mantel above the hearth, 3 candles burned in mismatched holders, one brass, one carved wood, one a flat river stone into which a shallow depression had been worn or made, the candle's own base of dripped wax forming its holder. Between the candles, a shallow dish held dried flowers, not arranged formally, but rested there the way things rest when they have been placed with care, and then simply left, the care already accomplished. The scent of the room had deepened since she arrived, the chamomile in her tea, and the wood smoke, and beneath both of these, something Sierra now recognized as dried lavender. She found it without looking. A bundle of it hung above the nearest bookshelf, tied with a piece of plain twine. Its color faded from purple to the soft gray silver of old velvet. The chair she was sitting in was very comfortable, not architecturally designed for comfort, but comfortable in the way of things that have held many people's weight over many years and have learned the shape of human tiredness. The cushions gave without collapsing. The arms were at exactly the right height. The back curved in a way that asked nothing of her spine, but to simply stop holding itself upright. Sierra realized quite suddenly that her shoulders had dropped. She had not asked them to. They had simply released, the way water releases from a fist when the fist finally opens. Outside, through the old paned window. The night was full and deep. The trees stood in their slow, dark patience. The lantern above the inn door swung very gently in a small breath of wind, and its light moved across the stone of the path in soft amber waves, each one dissolving before it fully reached the dark. Marin settled into the chair across from her and wrapped both hands around her own cup of tea and said nothing at all. The silence was the most comfortable silence Sierra had rested inside in a very long time. After a while, Marin rose and offered to show Sierra her room. This was said without assumption, not "your room is ready," as though her arrival had been anticipated, but with an openness that suggested the inn would simply arrange itself around whoever came. Sierra set down her empty cup. The tea had grown cool without her noticing. She had been so still, and followed Marin toward the narrow staircase at the back of the room. The staircase was old and beautiful. The railing was turned wood, worn to a near polish by hands. The stairs themselves rose in a gentle curve, each one worn in its center, each one covered with a runner of deep green carpet held in place by small brass rods at the base of each step. The carpet was soft under her feet, even through her shoes. On the wall beside the staircase, a series of small watercolor paintings hung in mismatched frames, not dramatic landscapes, but quiet ones. A single tree in fog, the corner of a windowsill with rain against the glass, a wooden dock extending into still water at dusk. Each painting was intimate in scale, something made to be looked at closely, something that rewarded attention. Sierra paused at one, the windowsill in rain, and looked at it for a moment. The paint was thin and soft, the colors of it gray and blue, and the faintest, most tentative yellow. And the way it had been made, the way the paint had been allowed to bleed just slightly at the edges of things, gave it the quality of a memory rather than a documentation. Something genuinely seen and genuinely felt, and then committed to paper with a hand that understood the difference between recording and remembering. "Did you paint these?" she asked. "Some of them," Marin said, from the top of the stairs. "Some were painted by guests. People leave things here sometimes when they go." Sierra thought about this as she continued up the stairs. what people chose to leave, what they felt the hollow deserved to keep. The hallway at the top was narrow and low-ceilinged, lit by 2 oil lamps mounted in iron brackets on the walls, their flames small and very still in the sheltered air of the corridor. The doors along the hallway were dark wood, each one slightly different handles, different widths, as though the rooms behind them had been added one at a time over a long span of years. Each generation building what the previous one had not needed. Marin stopped at the 3rd door and opened it. The room beyond was small. This was the first thing Sierra noticed, and it was immediately the right thing, not cramped, but scaled to intimacy, to the kind of privacy that makes you feel held rather than exposed. The ceiling sloped gently toward one side, following the line of the roof, and was the color of cream touched with age. A window in the slope of the ceiling looked directly upward at the night sky, a skylight, old glass, and through it Sierra could see stars, real and unhurried, more of them than she had seen in years. Living in the city had not taken them away, she understood. She had simply stopped looking upward. The bed was narrow and high, a real bed, with a headboard of carved dark wood and a mattress that was clearly deep with a proper featherweight to it, covered with a quilt in shades of indigo and pale cream and the soft green of lichen. The pillows were many and various. On the table beside the bed, a candle burned in a low glass holder, its flame very still, casting a circle of amber light that reached just to the edges of the quilt and no further. On the table also, a small ceramic pitcher and cup, a sprig of dried rosemary tied with plain twine, and a single smooth stone the color of moonlight, perfectly round, placed exactly as if it had always belonged there. Sierra reached out and picked up the stone. It was cool in her palm for only a moment. Then it held her warmth back to her, amplified slightly, as though the stone was interested in the transaction. "What is this?" she asked. "A resting stone," Marin said simply, from the doorway. "Old habit of the hollow. People who have stayed here have always left one on that table. We've never known who started it." Sierra turned the stone in her fingers. Smooth, dense, perfectly weighted. She set it back down. The room smelled of rosemary and the faintest cedar, and the deep, complex smell of old wood and old cloth and candlelight. The smell of rooms that have held many people's sleep, many people's dreams, many mornings of slow waking. It was a generous smell, a room that had given rest to many people had a texture to it, Sierra thought, as though each night of good sleep left something behind in the walls, something the next guest could breathe in without knowing. There is a washroom at the end of the hall, Marin said. Whatever you need is there. Breakfast is whenever you wake. There is no schedule here. She said this last part gently, but deliberately, the way you might press your hand lightly against someone's arm when they are about to rush off unnecessarily. No schedule, Sierra repeated. No schedule, Marin confirmed. And then she said goodnight in the way of someone who has said it thousands of times and has never let it become routine, warmly, specifically, as though this particular goodnight was the one she had been saving. She pulled the door closed. Sierra stood in the small room for a long moment, the candle burning beside her and the stars visible through the ceiling glass above. She was still fully dressed. She stood and looked up at the stars and let the quiet press gently against her from all sides. Then, slowly, she began to make herself at home. Sleep that night came for Sierra the way it comes when you have stopped waiting for it. She had changed into the soft cotton nightgown she found folded on the chair by the window, cream-colored, worn to a perfect softness, smelling of something like sunlight and dried flowers, as though it had been aired in a garden and then kept carefully. And she had washed her face in the washroom at the end of the hall, which was lit by a single candle, and had a basin of old white porcelain and water that ran cool and clean and faintly mineral tasting when she cupped it briefly to her mouth. She had looked at herself in the old mirror above the basin, its surface slightly foxed at the edges with age, and had noticed that her face looked less tightly held than usual, as though the drive and the arrival and the tea and the room had been a slow series of small releases, each one so gentle she had not felt it happening until it was done. Back in the room, she had pulled back the quilt on the bed and found sheets the color of old ivory, cool and finely woven, and had lain down with her head on the nearest pillow and looked up through the glass in the ceiling at the stars. They were very still up there, or rather, the clouds moved slowly across them, and the stars themselves appeared and disappeared in a slow and patient rhythm, like a breathing, like the sky itself was resting. She had not expected to think of anything, but in the first quiet minutes, small thoughts moved through her the way leaves move through still water, without urgency, without sticking, just crossing the surface and then continuing. She thought of her apartment with its drawer that stuck and her coffee maker that took too long and the stack of papers on her desk she had not yet sorted. These thoughts arrived without weight. She saw them, she recognized them, and they drifted on. This was new. Usually these thoughts arrived with claws, each one catching on the next, building into the familiar architecture of nighttime worry. But here, in this room, with the candle burning its slow amber circle beside her, and the stars doing their patient work above her, the thoughts came through without clinging. She noticed this for a moment, the absence of the catching. And then she stopped noticing anything at all. She slept. It was a deep sleep, the kind she had not had in long enough that when she woke, hours later, she did not immediately know where she was. The room was still dark. The candle burned very low now, its light a small and drowsy thing, barely more than a glow. The stars above the ceiling glass had shifted. The sky had rotated in its patient way while she had been gone, and different stars were visible now, lower in the south, their light steady and cold and beautiful. She lay still for a moment in the not knowing. This, she found, was also all right. The not knowing was soft rather than alarming. The room was warm. The quilt was weighted in the perfect way. There was no sound but her own breathing and a very faint sound from outside, the trees in a small wind, and beneath that still, the water over stones, closer now or simply more audible in the deep quiet of the hour. She had no idea what time it was. She did not look for her phone. She lay still and let the not knowing sit with her, and it sat companionably without demand. After some time, she could not have said how long she slept again. The second sleep was even deeper. She descended into it the way you descend into warm water, gradually, completely, with a sensation of the world becoming muffled, and then absent, and then nothing at all. Just the long, clean dark that is not emptiness, but fullness of a different kind. In this sleep she dreamed, but the dreams were quiet ones. A field of pale grass in wind, a boat at anchor on still water, a door left open onto a garden, light coming through from the other side, warm and without sauce, simply present. She woke to morning, or rather, to the suggestion of morning. The light through the ceiling glass had changed from the blue-black of deep night to something softer, the blue-gray of pre-dawn, and the single star she could still see in the glass was fainter now, fading into the growing light, not disappearing, but becoming part of it, absorbed. She lay on her back and watched this happen. It took a long time, the way everything that is actually worth watching takes a long time. The sky went from gray-blue to a particular shade of pale blue that existed only in this liminal half hour before full sunrise. And then the edges of it toward the south began to warm very slightly to something approaching gold. Sierra lay and watched the sky change through the ceiling glass and breathed in and out, slow, unhurried. She could not remember the last morning she had watched the light change. She was usually awake before it was worth watching, lying rigid with half-finished worries, or asleep through it entirely, the blinds drawn. She had not simply looked at a morning sky. She realized in a very long time. Somewhere downstairs, she heard a sound, low, rhythmic, domestic. The sound of something being set on a wooden surface, of a drawer opening and closing, of water being poured. The sounds of a kitchen, slow and careful, someone moving through the morning with the patience of someone who loves mornings. Marin preparing breakfast. Sierra did not rush. She lay another few minutes in the now pale light, listening to the small sounds rise gently from below, and felt something she had not felt in a long time, a genuine, uncomplicated willingness to simply continue. Breakfast was at a table near the window. The room looked different in morning light. The hearth was cold now, the embers long gone to white ash, but the room had its own warmth from the low sun coming through the old glass of the windows, touching everything at a long and gentle angle. The bookshelves caught the light along their spines. The small clay animals on the middle shelf cast shot soft shadows, and the dried lavender above the shelf had taken on a warmth of color it did not have at night, its faded silver tinted to rose and gold. The table by the window held two places, which Sierra found touching. Marin had set two places, as though breakfast between them was assumed, as though there was no version of this morning in which Sierra ate alone. There was bread, dark and dense, sliced thickly and placed in a cloth-lined basket. There was a small crock of butter, pale yellow and unsalted, with a wooden knife resting across its top. There were two soft boiled eggs in carved wooden cups, their shells pale blue-gray, the color of a sky before rain. There was a pot of something dark and fragrant, not coffee, something softer, something that smelled of chicory and spice and warm earth. And there were apples, two of them deep red, placed simply in a shallow bowl, as though the bowl was only there to give them somewhere to rest. Marin was already at the table when Sierra came downstairs. She was reading, or had been reading, a book face down on the table, and she looked up when she heard Sierra's step on the last stair and said good morning in her low, river water voice. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "I did," Sierra said, and the simplicity of this was remarkable to her. She had not been able to answer that question honestly in months. "I slept very well." Marin smiled, this time the full expression, not contained, but open, the smile of someone genuinely pleased by someone else's good fortune. "Morrow Hollow is good for that," she said, "and let it be true without explaining it." They sat across from each other and ate. The bread was extraordinary, dense, and slightly sweet, with a texture that required real attention, the kind of bread that you have to be present to eat properly. The butter melted against the warmth of it. The eggs were exactly right. The dark drink, she did not ask its name, was bitter and warm and grounding in a way that coffee, with all its urgency, never was. It did not speed anything up. It simply made the present moment feel more firmly itself. Outside the window, the morning was progressing in its unhurried way. The trees at the edge of the clearing were holding the last mist of the night in their upper branches, thin and white, dissolving slowly in the growing warmth. The sky above was a pale, clear blue, and a pair of birds, small, dark, moving quickly, crossed from one tree to another and disappeared into the upper branches without sound. "There's a path," Marin said, "if you want to walk this morning. It goes around the hollow, not far. An hour, perhaps. It follows the water most of the way." Sierra thought of the water she had heard last night, the sound of it, low and continuous. Is that a stream, a small one? It runs along the eastern edge of the hollow and comes back around beneath the root bridge at the north side. It's been running as long as the inn has stood here. She paused, and then, with a quality that was not quite nostalgia, but contained something like it. Longer, probably. "I'd like that," Sierra said. "The walk." Marin nodded and returned to her bread. The meal continued in the way of unhurried meals, not rushed, not stretched, simply lasting as long as it needed to. The morning light moved across the table in its slow diagonal as the sun climbed. The shadows of the windows iron leading drawing soft dark lines across the bread basket, the apple bowl, the back of Marin's hand as she lifted her cup. Sierra watched the light and let herself simply be inside it. After breakfast, Marin cleared the plates with the same quietness with which she did everything. Not silently, not furtively, but without unnecessary motion. Each thing done once and well. Sierra helped without being asked and was received without comment, which was the right response. She dried while Marin washed, and the bowls and cups were pale inside from many washings, the patterns on them wan to suggestions. And there was something beautiful in that, in the record of use, in the proof of all the mornings that had passed through this sink, all the hands that had held these cups. She put on her coat, her own coat, slightly incongruous here, dark wool and modern cut. But Marin gave it no particular attention. And Marin directed her to the eastern side of the hollow with a gesture and two simple instructions. Stay with the sound of the water, and you will not get lost. And take whatever time the path asks. Sierra stepped out the back door into the morning. The air had sharpened since yesterday. It carried real cold now, the clean cold of early November, the kind that does not threaten, but simply announces its presence. Her breath went before her in a small pale cloud. The grass was shot and slightly frosted, each blade edged in white that caught the sun and turned briefly to silver before it melted. The path began as a slight parting in the grass, not a cleared trail, but the kind of path that forms when enough feet have chosen the same way through a place, year after year, because it was simply the most natural way to go. She began to walk. The path curled away from the inn and into the trees. The trees here were older than the ones on the road, or felt older, at least, which may amount to the same thing. Their trunks were wide, their bark deep grooved, the spaces between their roots colonized by moss and low fern, and the occasional cluster of pale mushrooms, cap-shaped and still with dew. The canopy above was thin with autumn, most of the leaves gone or going, but what remained caught the morning light in small, bright pieces, yellowed and amber, and a translucent gold where the sun came directly through. Each leaf briefly a window of warm color. The sound of the water found her quickly, sooner than she expected, as though it had been listening for her footstep and came to meet her. It was the sound she had heard from her window last night and from her bed. Steady, layered, not loud, but present in the way of things that have been going on for a long time and are entirely comfortable with it. She stepped around the wide trunk of an ash tree, and the stream appeared. It was not large. She could have crossed it in 2 steps, 1 foot on either bank. But it was clear, genuinely clear, the kind of clarity that belongs to very cold or very ancient water, where you can see straight through to the bottom, and the bottom is clean stone and pale sand, and the occasional dark leaf settled gently there. It moved over the stones in a way that was almost conversational, not loud, not rushing, but articulate, each stone finding its own note in the passing of the water over it. The whole of it, a kind of slow music without beginning or end. Sierra stood on the bank and simply listened. She thought, I have not stood still outside in a long time. This was true. She walked in the city, everyone did, walking between places, walking with purpose, walking against timers. But standing still outside, with nothing to cross toward and no one to keep up with, simply standing in a place and letting the sounds of it reach her. This she had not done in a long time. She could not have said how long. The stream ran over a small shelf of stone a few feet to her left, and the water there changed tone, slightly higher, slightly brighter, a brief cascade that caught the light and broke it into moving pieces. She watched the light move on the water. It was restless and unhurried simultaneously, the same motion always happening and never repeating, every moment of it different from the last. She began to walk again, following the stream's eastern bank as Marin had suggested. The path stayed close to the water. Sometimes it rose slightly above it, and she looked down through the roots and rocks at the stream running below. Sometimes it descended, and she walked nearly at the water's level, and she could hear it more deeply then, feel the faint cool moisture it carried in the air, and see the small rocks along the bottom more clearly. Quartz white and dark granite, and occasional pieces of something almost translucent, the color of old sea glass. After some time, she was not counting time, which felt like a gift she had given herself. She came to a place where the stream broadened, not dramatically, but noticeably, opening out to form a shallow pool no larger than a small room, its surface calmer than the running sections, almost still at the center, where the light lay flat and the reflection of the sky appeared pale blue, perfectly inverted, with the silhouette of bare branches crossing it. On the bank beside the pool, there was a stone. Not a small stone, not a pebble, but a large one the size of a seat, and shaped, over whatever uncountable years of weather and ice, and the slow insistence of the earth, into something that resembled one, its top surface smoothed and slightly hollowed. Beside it, someone had placed 3 smaller stones in a loose triangle, as though marking the place, or as though 3 people had stood here once and each left something. Sierra sat on the large stone. The cold of it came through her coat immediately, not unpleasantly. It was the clean cold of stone that has been outdoors all night, holding the temperature of the dark, and it made her more present, more firmly located in her own body. She sat with her hands on her knees and looked at the surface of the pool. A single leaf drifted across it, dry and curled, moving without visible cause, crossing the still center of the pool in a diagonal, and coming to rest against a half-submerged root at the far bank. She watched this happen completely. The whole arc of it, from entrance to rest. She had not watched one thing completely in a long time. That thought arrived quietly and stayed for a moment, and she let it stay, and then it was gone. Bird landed on a low branch above the pool, small, round-bodied, its breast a soft, rusted orange. It sat and regarded the pool as she was regarding it, the two of them observers, briefly sharing the same frame of vision. It did not sing. It only sat. After a time, it flew. Sierra watched it go, a small dark shape rising between the trees, and then absorbed by the distance between branches, becoming first hard to see and then impossible. The forest taking it back without drama. She sat for a while longer beside the pool, breathing. In the cold air, the green smell, the mineral trace of the water. Out, long, slower than she would have managed yesterday. Whatever the hollow had begun doing to her last night, she could feel it continuing. The root bridge was exactly as Marin had described, though describing it as a bridge was perhaps generous, and perhaps exactly right. It was a place where two large trees, one on each bank, had grown toward each other over the stream, and their roots had met beneath the water and intertwined there, building a crossing that was partly above the surface and partly below it. The roots smooth with long use, and covered along their upper surfaces with a short, fine moss the color of new grass. It was not a bridge anyone had made. It was a bridge that had made itself over a span of years that Sierra could not calculate. The two trees finding each other across the water and choosing to be continuous. She crossed it slowly. Her feet found the roots without difficulty. They were worn in the right places, the right distances apart. She held her arms slightly out for balance and felt the moss under her boots, damp and giving. The stream ran beneath her, and she heard it pass below, slightly muffled by the root mat, a sound coming up through the wood and into her feet, something she felt as much as heard. On the other side, the path led through a different quality of trees. Younger ones here, closer together, their canopy denser despite the autumn, more evergreen among them, cedar and yew, and a kind of dark needled conifer she did not know the name of. The light was different here, greener and more filtered, and the floor of the path was softer, a deep layer of dropped needles that silenced her footsteps entirely. It was the quietest place she had ever walked. Not silent, there was still the water, heard now from a greater distance, still the occasional creak of a branch in the small wind above, still the barely there sound of a bird moving through needles somewhere deep in the trees. But the acoustic quality of the space was extraordinary. The sound didn't carry, it settled, and what reached her ears was only the most local, the most near, her own breath, her heart. She walked slowly. The path curved northward and then began to curve back west, as Marin had said it would. And through the trees ahead, she began to see the amber glow of the inn's windows coming back now, the circle closing. She was not hurrying toward it. She was simply moving the way the path moved, letting the return be as unhurried as the going. She thought, walking, of what Marin had said at breakfast, that Morrow Hollow was good for sleeping. She thought about why this might be true, not in a medical or analytical way, not in the way she might once have approached such a question, looking for a mechanism or a principle to extract and replicate. She thought about it the way you think about something while walking through a quiet wood, which is a way of thinking that does not demand conclusions. The hollow felt outside of time, not in a strange way, not supernatural or impossible, but simply in the way of places that have not been arranged for efficiency or productivity, places where no one is expecting anything of you, places where the rhythm of the day is set by light and warmth and hunger and tiredness, rather than by appointment and notification and the particular exhaustion of being observed. She had not been unobserved in a long time, or rather, she had been alone often enough, but alone is not the same as unobserved. The city observed you, she thought. The city had 1,000 unblinking eyes, each one legible even when you weren't looking. Here, the trees were not watching. The stream was not evaluating. Marin, in her quiet green coat, was interested rather than measuring. There was a difference between those things. She emerged from the young wood into the clearing behind the inn and stood for a moment in the open air. The sun had climbed considerably during her walk, and the day had warmed from its early cold into something gentler. The frost long gone from the grass, the light fuller and more golden. The inn before her was warm in this light, the stone of it amber and cream, the windows bright, the lantern above the front door visible around the corner of the building, still burning its patient flame even in daylight. Marin was in the small garden at the south side of the inn. Sira had not noticed the garden when she arrived in the dark, and she stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it now. It was enclosed, walled on 3 sides with low stone, open only toward the inn itself. And it was the kind of garden that is not decorative but purposeful. Raised beds of dark soil, some still holding the structure of harvested plants, their dried stalks tied and left standing, bundles of something dried and hung on a line of twine between 2 posts, a row of clay pots along the south wall, their contents unclear but green. Marin was kneeling beside one of the raised beds, her hands in the soil. She looked up when she heard Sira's approach and raised one hand in greeting without rising, as though standing would have been excessive. "The bridge held then," she said. "The bridge held," Sira confirmed. She came and stood at the low garden wall and looked at the beds. The soil was dark and very fine, the kind that has been tended for a long time, amended and turned and given back to itself over many seasons. "What do you grow here?" Sira asked. Marin looked at the beds with the expression of someone regarding a long collaboration. "Whatever the hollow needs," she said, "and whatever a person who is staying here might need." She pressed the soil gently flat with her palm. "This season, a great deal of chamomile." Sira smiled. The sun was warm on her back. The garden smelled of soil and dried herb, and the faint sweetness of something she could not name, growing quietly in one of the clay pots against the south wall. The afternoon came on slowly. After the walk and the garden, Sira found herself at the deep armchair near the hearth again, a book open in her lap, one she had taken from the shelf without particular intention, pulling it from between its neighbors the way you pull a thread to see what it belongs to. It was old, the cover plain dark blue cloth, the pages yellowed at their edges, the text inside a novel she did not recognize, set in a small anonymous city in some unnamed northern country, in a time that felt like the recent past and the distant past simultaneously. The prose was very quiet. Things happened in it the way things happen in real life, slowly, largely through small observation, through the textures of rooms and weather and meals. She read several pages without quite deciding to, and then looked up, and the fire was burning again, Marin having tended it at some point while Sierra was in the garden, and the light in the room had shifted to the low gold of mid-afternoon. She did not feel the usual pressure of hours. This was something she was becoming aware of incrementally, not the absence of time, but the absence of the feeling that time was going somewhere she needed to keep up with. The afternoon sat around her like water. She was inside it rather than being carried by it. Marin moved through the room occasionally, in and out of the kitchen, once to add a piece of wood to the fire, once to carry something upstairs. And each time she passed, she did so quietly, neither intrusive nor avoidant, simply present in the way of someone who belongs to a space and moves through it honestly. At some point, Sierra asked about the glass bottles on the bookshelf. She had been looking at them since she arrived. The way the light moved through their various colors, the way they were stoppered carefully, the way they were arranged without quite being arranged, as though each had been placed down once and then simply stayed. Marin came and stood beside the shelf and looked at them with her, both of them regarding the bottles in the late afternoon light. Tinctures, she said, most of them. Some are infusions, things I make from what grows in the hollow. She touched the pale green one lightly with one finger. Lemon balm, very good for minds that won't stop. She touched the dusty rose one. Hawthorn berry, good for the chest, for the kind of tightness that isn't physical. And the amber one, valerian and passion flower. That one speaks for itself. Sierra looked at them and thought of the tea from the previous night, its taste she had not been able to name. My tea last night. Yes, said Marin simply. What was in it? Chamomile, of course, and a little lemon balm from the green bottle, and something I gather from the hollow itself. She paused, and the pause was thoughtful rather than evasive. I don't have a name for it. It grows along the north bank of the stream in late autumn. Small white flowers. It smells like snow before it falls. She looked at Sierra. It doesn't do anything dramatic. It simply makes it easier to put things down. Sierra considered this. Put things down. The things we carry into sleep with us, Marin said. Thoughts, lists, unfinished feelings. Most people don't know they're carrying them until they can't sleep. But the body knows. Sierra thought of the small thoughts moving through her without catching, of lying in the bed under the starlight with her shoulders finally down. She thought of how long it had been since sleep had felt like going somewhere rather than failing at something. "Can I take some with me?" she asked. "When I go." "The hollow doesn't keep things for itself," Marin said. "What's useful to a person takes." She returned to the kitchen then, and Sierra returned to her book. But she sat for a moment with the book closed in her lap and looked at the row of bottles, their colors gathering the afternoon light, pale green, dusty rose, amber, and felt something she had not expected to feel here: gratitude. Not the performed kind, not the consciously remembered kind, but the true kind that arrives without being summoned, that sits in the chest and is warm there. She was grateful for the road that had appeared, for the lantern still burning when she arrived, for the tea that let her put things down. She opened the book again. Outside, the light continued its long gold descent toward evening. Somewhere in the kitchen, something was beginning to cook, a slow smell of root vegetables and warm stock, and perhaps a bay leaf, perhaps a sprig of something dry and green. The beginning of a meal that would take a long time and not be hurried. Sierra read her book. The words moved through her at the pace of the afternoon, slowly, leaving impressions rather than details, the way all good reading does when you are genuinely rested enough to receive it. On the mantel, the 3 candles burned with their small and steady flames. The fire spoke occasionally in the low language of settling wood, a creak and a small exhalation of heat. The clock on the shelf, she had not noticed it before. A small wooden mantel clock of some considerable age measured the hour with a tick so soft and steady that it was not a reminder of time, but simply a part of the room's breathing. Tick, 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 a sound like a patient heart, like something that knows how long everything takes and is content with this knowledge. Sierra turned another page. Dinner was served when the light outside had fully turned to evening. There was no announcement of it, no call from the kitchen, no prescribed hour, only the smell growing richer and more insistent from that direction. The kind of smell that moves into a room and changes the quality of the air there. And at some point, Sierra became aware that she was hungry in a real and uncomplicated way. Not the anxious hunger of having forgotten to eat, or the joyless hunger of the midday hour, but something more like what she imagined was an original hunger. The body's simple, true request. She came to the kitchen doorway, and Marin looked up from the stove and said, "Now is good." The kitchen was small and warm, and full of the smell of what had been cooking. The stove was old, iron-fronted, burning wood. She could hear the fire inside it if she listened, and the pots on it were heavy and dark with many seasonings. There was a small wooden table with 2 chairs pulled up and 2 bowls waiting, already filled, already steaming. The stew was made of root vegetables, parsnip and carrot, and something purple-fleshed she could not identify. All of it soft and yielding in a broth that was deeply colored, almost dark, flavored with herbs and the slow concentration of long cooking. There was bread again, a different kind this time, round, crusted, with a dense interior, and a quality of warmth that suggested it had been made today and not long ago. There was butter in the same pale crock. They ate without conversation at first. This was not awkward. It was the comfortable silence of 2 people who have spent enough of the day together. That silence has become simply another mode of company. Sierra ate slowly and found the food extraordinarily satisfying in the way that simple things are when they are done with full attention. Every element contributing, nothing unnecessary. The whole of it adding up to something more than its parts. After a while, Marin said, "You have not been sleeping well for some time." It was not a question, but it held a question inside it, the kind that invites a real answer without demanding one. Sierra held her spoon. "No," she said, 6 months maybe, since last spring." "Since something changed," Marin said. "Since several things changed," Sierra said. Since I understood that several things had already changed, and I had not caught up with the understanding yet." She paused and looked at the stew. "It's strange, isn't it? You can be living inside a change the whole time and not know it. And then one day you know it, and your body thinks it's all happening at once. Your body is not wrong, Marin said. For the body, understanding is the event. The change may have happened earlier, but the body only processes what the mind finally gives it. She broke off a piece of bread. The body is not behind. It is simply thorough. Sira thought about this. She thought about the months of not sleeping, the nights of the small thoughts with their claws, the particular exhaustion of having processed nothing. So what do I do with that? She asked. With all the things that didn't get processed. Marin set down her bread. You rest, she said. Not sleep, though sleep is part of it. You rest in the old sense. You give yourself time without requirements. You let your body do what it knows how to do, which is to heal and settle, and relearn quiet if you give it the space. She looked at Sira steadily, not with the look of a prescription being delivered, but with the look of a fact being offered, true, available, neither imposed nor withheld. The hollow is good at that, she said, at giving space. Sira nodded slowly. After dinner, they washed up together again. And then Marin made tea and brought it to the low table by the hearth. And they sat in their respective chairs. Marin, with her face turned slightly toward the fire. Sira, with her legs drawn up beneath her on the deep cushion. And the evening settled around them like something that had been waiting patiently for this particular hour. The fire was at its best now, not roaring, not newly lit, but mature. The logs burned to a stage that produced the most heat with the least performance. A deep orange-red glow that pulsed very slowly, like something breathing. Sira said, "Have you always kept this in?" Marin considered. "I have kept it for a very long time," she said. "Before me, my mother kept it. Before her, I do not know who kept it. But someone has always kept it. The hollow requires a keeper. Something has to hold the lantern." "And you don't mind?" Sira asked. "Being here mostly alone." Marin looked at the fire for a moment. "The hollow is not empty," she said. "It is full of what has been brought here and what has been left. Of the people who came and rested and went on. Of everything the stream has been saying since before I was born." She paused. "I am not alone here. I am simply still." Sira turned this over in her mind, feeling the specific weight of it, the particular truth. She sipped her tea, clock on the mantel ticked its patient tick. Outside, the night had fully arrived, deep and dark, and without wind now, the trees utterly still, the stars above the small gap in the canopy unnervingly clear, the kind of clear that belongs to cold nights that have lost all their moisture. The lantern above the door burned on. Sierra sat with her tea and the fire's warmth and the truth of what Marin had said, and did not feel, for the first time in a long time, as though being still was the same as being empty. The second night's sleep was different from the first. The first night she had descended quickly, like something released. This night she descended slowly, and she noticed the descent, and this itself was the gift, the ability to lie in the room above Morrow Hollow and feel herself growing heavier in increments. Feel the distance between herself and the ceiling growing with each breath. Feel the world's grip on her attention, loosen one finger at a time. She had a candle burning again, a different one, slightly taller, the same amber glass holder. And she had propped herself against the many pillows and watched its flame for a while before lying down properly. Candle flames are good for tired minds. She was beginning to understand. They give the eyes something to rest on that moves, but never startles, that changes without demanding engagement. You can let your focus go soft around a candle flame, and the flame does not mind. It simply continues. It is very patient with inattentive observers. She had brought one of the small bottles from downstairs, the pale green one, lemon balm. Marin had unstopped it and put 3 drops into her evening tea without ceremony, as though this were simply something you did. And Sierra had drunk the tea and felt not sedated, not altered, but quieter in the region behind her eyes, the place where the night thoughts usually gathered and set up their restless circling. That place was calmer tonight, not empty, but calmer, as though the thoughts were present, but had been given comfortable chairs and saw no reason to pace. She lay down. Through the ceiling glass, the stars were extraordinary. The cold had sharpened the sky to something crystalline, and the stars burned with an intensity that was almost blue at the edges, their light clean and ancient, and impersonal in the best way, impersonal meaning without expectation, without need for response. They had been burning before anyone was there to see them, and they would burn long after. Sira looked at them and felt the smallness of this in a way that was not diminishment, but relief. The relief of not being the center of anything. The relief of being one small, warm creature in a very large and very old and entirely indifferent universe. Safe in a small room, safe beneath a quilt, safe under a skylight in a place outside of time. She closed her eyes. The sounds of the hollow at night were slightly different from those of the early hours. The stream was there always, its low, continuous voice coming up from the east. But now there were other sounds, the deep silence of the trees in still air, which was its own kind of sound, a sound of the absence of movement that was not the same as nothing, and the occasional far-off note of a night bird, single and spaced widely, more like punctuation than melody. She breathed. In the morning, she would have to think about leaving. She knew this the way you know an inevitable thing, not urgently, not with dread, but with the acknowledgement that honesty requires. The world was there, on the other side of whatever road had brought her here, and it would continue to be there, requiring her eventually. The drawer that stuck, the desk with its papers, the coffee maker with its too long cycle. But these things, she thought now, might be different when she returned to them. Not the things themselves. The drawer would still stick. The papers would still be there. But the person who encountered them might be different. A person who had slept 2 real nights. A person who had sat by a stream and watched a leaf cross still water without thinking about anything else. A person who had been told by a woman in a green coat that her body was not behind, only thorough. That being still was not the same as being empty. She thought about what she might take from Morrow Hollow. Not the green bottle, though Marin had said she could. She would leave the bottle on the shelf for the next tired person who arrived by this road, the next person whose sleeping had come loose from them. But she would take the things that did not need to be carried physically, the particular quality of the silence around the root bridge, the feel of the resting stone warm in her palm, the image of the fire at its best, patient, sufficient, breathing. She would take the understanding of what rest actually meant. She had thought rest was what happened when you were not working. But Marin had described it differently, and Sira believed her. Rest was something active in its way. Rest was the giving of space. Rest was the decision to not require anything of yourself for long enough that the body could remember its own authority, its own capacity to regulate and restore and settle. She had given herself 3 days in this hollow, and she would leave with the experience of that as evidence. Not a system, not a regimen, not a set of techniques. Just, I was tired in a deep way, and I went somewhere quiet, and I gave it time. Her breathing had slowed considerably. She was aware of this as a gentle background fact, not something to note or correct or maintain. Simply what the body had done on its own when given sufficient calm. The candle flame on the bedside table had steadied to something very small and very still. The stars above the ceiling glass burned on. The stream ran its ancient conversation below the eastern trees, unhearing, unhurried, saying the same thing it had always been saying and would go on saying, which was not words, but was something more reliable than words. Sierra let go of the rest of the night, and the night received her. She woke to the smell of something baking. It rose through the floorboards and the slim gap at the bottom of the bedroom door, and arrived before the light did warm and sweet and yeasty. The smell of something being transformed by heat, something raw becoming something finished. It was the smell of effort applied with patience, and it was one of the most comforting smells in the human register of experience. Sierra thought, lying on her back and breathing it in, because it meant that someone was awake nearby and doing something deliberate and good. The light through the ceiling glass was the color it had been yesterday morning at this hour, the deep blue of late pre-dawn, with the first intimations of warmth appearing at the south edge of the sky. Not quite color yet, only the suggestion of it. The sky preparing itself the way a room prepares itself for a guest. She lay still and let the smell of baking and the color of the pre-dawn sky be her entire morning for several minutes. This was the 3rd morning she had woken in this room, and the room had become familiar in the way that good places become familiar, not through repetition, but through recognition, as though the room had always been a room she knew and had simply been waiting for her to arrive. the slope of the ceiling above her, the particular amber of the candle holder when the light caught it, the feel of the quilt's weight, the way the pillow held her. These were not strange anymore, but comfortable in the deepest sense, the sense of comfort that has nothing to do with luxury and everything to do with fit. She thought about the word rest again, and about what Marin had said. This was the third day she had woken without the immediate invasion of the night thoughts, without the flat gray feeling that had greeted her for months, the feeling of already being behind, already inadequate, already in debt to a day she had not yet entered. Those feelings had not disappeared. She was not foolish enough to think 3 days in a hollow outside ordinary time had resolved the structural exhaustions of her life, but they had quieted, or rather, she had quieted enough to notice that they did not have to be the first thing. The first thing could be the light. The first thing could be the smell of baking. The first thing could be the simple fact of being here, now, alive, warm, with a whole day ahead that wanted nothing from her. The first thing could be a choice. She rose slowly, sitting up in the slow way she had learned here, not lurching, not swinging her legs over in the brusque way of habitual mornings, but sitting up into the room, letting the room receive her weight before she put it anywhere else. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, her feet on the floorboards, and felt the cold of the floor and the cool of the room before the warmth of the quilt reached her, and found this sensation clarifying rather than unpleasant. It made her specific. It reminded her of her edges. She dressed and went downstairs. Marin was at the kitchen table, a cup before her, reading or not reading, the book open, but her eyes on the window above the sink, which showed the garden in its early morning version. Dark soil, dried stalks, the clay pots along the south wall just beginning to catch the first flat light. When Sierra appeared in the doorway, Marin turned and gestured toward the counter without speaking, and Sierra saw a round loaf still steaming faintly from the oven on a wooden board. Beside it, butter, a knife, a small dish of something dark and translucent, jam, quince perhaps, the color of old amber. She cut the bread herself. This felt right. The bread was extraordinary again, but differently this time. This was the bread of morning, lighter inside than yesterday's dense evening loaf, its crust thin and crackled, its crumb open and soft, and with the butter and jam, it was simply one of the most satisfying things she had eaten in recent memory. She ate standing at the counter and did not apologize for this informality, and Marin made no comment. "You're leaving today," Marin said, not a question. "I think I should," Sierra said. She paused. "Not because I want to." Marin nodded, and the nod understood the full complexity of this, that not wanting to leave and knowing it was time to leave could be true simultaneously, that a place could be right for a specific season of a person's life and not be meant to be permanent, that the gift of a place like this was precisely its temporariness, that it sent you back changed, and therefore it was honest. "The hollow will be here," Marin said, "if the road appears again." "If I find it again," Sierra said. "If you're quiet enough," Marin said gently. After breakfast, full and unhurried, everything eaten slowly, Marin making tea for them both without being asked, because it was simply what the morning required, Sierra went upstairs and packed her bag. There was not much to pack. She had arrived with only what was in the car, only the things of an unplanned journey. She changed the nightgown back to her own clothes, folded the gown, and left it on the chair. She paused at the bedside table. The resting stone sat in its place, cool, smooth, the color of a moonlit road. She picked it up and held it in her palm for a moment, felt its weight, its temperature changing to hers. Then she set it back down gently in exactly the same spot. Some things belong where they are. She took the dried sprig of rosemary from the table, though. That she tucked into her coat pocket. She went downstairs. The morning had fully arrived by the time Sierra brought her bag to the door. The sun was up now, properly up, the hollow lit by the clear, sharp light of a November morning that had decided to be generous. Every surface brightened, every stone in the inn wall showing its individual color and texture. The garden beyond the south corner carrying frost that sparkled extravagantly before the sun had warmed enough to take it away. Marin stood in the doorway with her as Sierra looked at the clearing one last time, the trees at its edges in their patient autumn, the pale grass, the sky above open and honest and blue. She did not want to leave in a rushed way. She did not want to leave in an emotional way either, with the pressure of significance that turns departures into performances. She wanted to leave the way the hollow seemed to suggest everything should happen, gently, completely, without leftover. "Thank you," she said to Marin. These were small words, but she said them with all of their weight, and Marin received them with the same attention she gave everything. "What you needed was always in you," Marin said. "The hollow only gave it quiet." Sierra thought about this. She thought about the months of sleeplessness, the clawing thoughts, the flat gray mornings. She thought about the road appearing, the lantern burning, the resting stone on the bedside table. She thought about Marin's voice saying your body is not behind. It is only thorough. And about the stream saying whatever it had always been saying over those particular stones. "Then I needed quiet," she said. "Most people do," Marin said. "Far more than they're given." She handed Sierra something then, a small cloth pouch, tied with a piece of brown twine. Sierra could feel through the cloth something dry and light, plant matter, herbs. It smelled of the pale green tincture and of something she recognized as the not quite chamomile, the unknown white flowered thing from the north bank of the stream, the thing that smelled like snow before it falls. "For the drawer by your bed," Marin said, "for the first few nights back." Sierra held the pouch carefully. "What do I do with it?" "Keep it near," Marin said. "That's enough." They stood in the doorway together for another moment, both looking at the clearing. And there was no pressure in the moment, no pull toward ending it or prolonging it. It was simply a moment that was complete while it was happening. Then Sierra said goodbye, genuinely, the full word, and walked to her car. The car was cold, as cars are cold when they have sat through 2 nights of autumn air, and it smelled of the ordinary world. Old receipts on the floor, a coffee cup from days ago in the holder, the particular impersonal smell of its own plastics and cloth. She put her bag in the back seat and sat behind the wheel for a moment without starting it. She looked at the inn through the windshield. Marin had not come out further. She stood at the door, her hands folded, her green coat catching the morning light, and she was simply there, present, still, entirely without urgency. Sierra raised a hand. Marin raised least one in return. She started the car. The road back was the same pale road she had arrived on, and it wound its way between the same old smooth-barked trees, through the same silence of late autumn, and Sierra drove it slowly. Not because she was uncertain of the way, but because she was not yet ready for speed. The road asked for slowness, as it had when she arrived, and she gave it what it asked. After the trees, the road broadened into something more recognizable. Asphalt again, lane markings, the distant sound of other traffic, like the sound of a river heard from a great height. She was returning to the world. She drove for a while. Through the windows on her left, the sun was now entirely above the horizon, moving the ordinary way through an ordinary sky. Its light, the flat, practical light of a weekday morning, rather than the amber of the hollow. But she looked at it and found it did not seem diminished. It was simply its own thing, the sun of the ordinary world, and the ordinary world was not without its own kind of beauty. Her hands on the wheel were relaxed. She noticed this and left them alone. At a crossroads she did not remember, she stopped and sat for a moment. To her left, the road went somewhere familiar. A highway she recognized, a route back toward the city, toward the drawer that stuck and the papers, and the long, flat obligations of her ordinary life. To her right, the road went somewhere she did not know, which meant it could go anywhere. She took the left. She took it without heaviness. In her coat pocket, the sprig of rosemary was dry and faintly fragrant, and on the passenger seat the small cloth pouch with its hollow herbs sat simply, without insistence, holding its quiet in the same way the hollow held it, just available, just present, just there for when you needed it. She would go home. She would sleep in her own bed. And when the small thoughts came, as they would come, because the world continues, and it is full of small things that press on a person, she would not fight them, and she would not be defeated by them. She would do what she had learned, or perhaps what she had been reminded was always possible. She would set them down gently and breathe. The road unreeled ahead of her in the morning light. She drove.